I'm delighted to welcome today the very lovely Rosalyn Palmer, who is a transformational coach and therapist. Welcome, Ros.
Hello, it's lovely to see you. I love being here. I follow you all the time, so thanks.
Bless you. Thank you. Well, the last time we were together was in person, and you came to my studio, didn't you? We did a radio interview.
Back in the not so crazy days when you were in the UK and you had your little studio. Funnily, I'm moving next week, Elaine, and I've just had one of those garden studios built.
Awesome. I loved mine. I was so sad when I had to dismantle it. I really loved it.
So excited! It's being skimmed and plastered today as we speak. And next week I'll be moving into it, so I'm very excited. My little walk, my commute will be across the lawn and then back again.
Perfect. Perfect. Fond memories for me too. And will you still be doing your Radio Newark? Uh,
I'm well, since COVID and lockdown, it's changed the format anyway because the studio's so small and there were such regulations. June Rowlands goes in every week, but now we have a kind of a rolling 4 week rota, if you like, where four of us all come in with some expert commentary. So yes, once a month, I'm there as the emotional well-being expert. And then we have Sue, who does cooking and all things domestic. We've got Claire, who does kids stuff, and we've got Rachel, who does the arts, and also she's a vegan. So it's quite nice. So we're almost like the guests now rather than the presenters, just because of circumstances.
Cool, and that's why I've transferred to doing podcast rather than radio because we've got to be practical, haven't we? At the end of the day, and
That,
we've got.
and funnily enough, I'm launching my own podcast series. So there we go. It'll be launching next month. So I've got 6 episodes recorded. So I've got a podcast series called Monkey Business coming out, which is for business people who really tend to be my go-to client, really about how they tame, how they work their monkey mind. So it's about successful mindsets and maybe some revelations about when they didn't quieten that chimp voice quite enough and maybe what happened and the hacks that they have to keep quietening it. And I've got some really high profile guests. So yeah, podcasting's the way forward.
Yeah, brilliant. And where will people find that podcast, Ros?
It will be on all the platforms. I've actually got a company working with me at the moment. I've recorded all the episodes. So we're pulling all the clever bits out at the moment and the headlines. And they assure me it will be on Podbeam, all the major platforms. But the best place probably to check would be to either follow me on LinkedIn or on my website, and we'll make a big announcement when I myself.
And what is your website?
www.rosalynpalmer.com. That's ROSALYN Palmer.
Marvelous. Okie dokie. So today we're going to talk about your transformational work that you do and your reset program and another program that you're going to be announcing shortly. So let's have a mini reveal now.
Mini reveal. Woo.
Uh,
So, yes, so I do transformational therapy and coaching. It's NLP based coaching, and the therapy is rapid transformational therapy and clinical hypnotherapy. So that's a combination of clinical hypnotherapy, NLP, CBT, and psychotherapy. It's very powerful. It uses all the best of those modalities. And I like doing the both. I like doing coaching and the therapy because my analogy is it's like having a really rubbish, weedy garden and you want it to look beautiful and plant some flowers. And you plant the flowers and then all the weeds come up and choke them. So the therapy will be if that weed root removal needs to take place. And the coaching is let's make this garden exactly how you want it to be and beautiful and plan it together. And yeah, reset, because I have a book called Reset and I do quite a few reset programs with people, really resetting their lives. But in lockdown, and particularly because I wasn't very well at the beginning of lockdown, you might remember. So my suspicion is I had the, let's not call it anything, C word. I really wasn't great for about 3 months. And I've had some periods of really critical illness in the past. I had a very compromised immune system because of being given antibiotics literally daily from being 1.5 to being 9, because I'd had whooping cough, German measles, and my lungs had collapsed as a baby. So I grew up throughout childhood with a compromised immune system, but didn't really realize that back in the day, and just kept throwing more antibiotics at it. And then went into a very stressful career in PR when I think my body just decided to say no very loudly to, to not very much sleep and too much alcohol and a very stressful job. And luckily I was working at Ab Fab Lin Franks, where most people were Buddhists and way ahead of their time in macrobiotic food, etc. And I think somebody more or less said to me, if you don't go and see, you know, some complementary therapists, you might not live to see 30. So I embraced all of that in my 20s, Ayurvedic medicine, lots of really fantastic stuff. But constant bouts of shingles, German measles, other things really kept depleting me. So that after I finished my PR career, I developed breast cancer, and that was 16 years ago. But I lived on an island in the Bahamas, and I pretty much healed myself. I did have some treatment, but through the land and the sea. So I'm a massive advocate about resetting yourself, resetting your body. And so when I wasn't well in COVID, I was like, right, you know what to do. And I reach out to brilliant people like you and lots of other health warriors. And I thought, you know, without that resilience, without that, what I like to call anti-fragility, we've got nothing. And it really brought it home to me. So I was really focusing on that, and I've done a collaboration already with a high-level business coach, high-growth business coach, Stuart Ross, and we were talking, and he said, well, we need to do a course on effectively resetting your resilience, anti-fragility. So I've got a course with him coming out, which is called 60 plus ways to boost your energy and focus. And it says what it does on the tin. There's more than 60 ways, but each of these ways, like let's take, for example, one of the ways might be breathing or yoga or vitamins or supplements or eating leafy green vegetables or hypnotherapy, for example, or decluttering, all the things that every day, if you see lots of good advice, we've effectively brought them all together. And because of our backgrounds, him being a very high level biz coach, and I met him through AFest, so he's a great person for mind body development as well. And all of my journey over the many years and my training, you know, these are good hacks. They're not just somebody who Googled something and decided to tell you something. So we talk about the thing, and then we give you some really practical ways to do it. There's going to be a free or included in the price hypnotic recording, which I've done, which is really all about boosting your immune system. There's a workbook and some other freebies. So it's going to be great, actually. I just need to see the light of day now, but it'll be very soon.
It sounds exactly what people need today, because there's so much overwhelm now. And even I was getting exhausted when you were saying 60 plus ways. In my head, I was listening in one ear, and in the other part of my head was thinking, oh, there's this and there's that, and there's so many ways. So presumably in something like you're offering, people will be able to go through, and they're not going to resonate with everything that you're suggesting, but go through and just go, oh yeah, tick 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 tick, yeah, can do that. There's lots that people can do, isn't there?
They can pick and choose. And I've also structured it, you know, to make people understand that the things that create our resilience and the things that create our good health are cognitive, you know, about our thinking brain and what we do. They're physical, about what we do with our body, to our body, in our body. Sensory, so they're about what we, you know, smell, sight, all those things around. And now some of those might resonate with people more than others, and they're going to be very clearly classified in those sections. So you're right. I've designed it sequentially, but even in the workbook, it says, you know, you can dip in, dip out, pick and choose. But each of those sections, I think, will go between about maybe 6 minutes for some of the shorter ones to maybe nearly 15 if it's something that we really need to discuss in more detail. And if you think there's I think there's about 63, but effectively that's maybe 15 minutes a day for 2 months if you actually went through the whole course. And at the end of it, you really, I think people would have certainly not the depth of knowledge that somebody like your good self has, but enough understanding and enough hacks to really, really make a difference in their life, and actually in an easy way.
Brilliant. And you only need one thing, don't you? A person will only need one thing, and it can be completely transformative. It can totally change their world, you know, make it the right way up instead of being upside down.
Well, one of them actually is from you, just so you know, which is having a grounding sheet. So it was because of picking up on something from you that I got a grounding sheet. And then Stuart and I were in conversation. He went, oh, do you know what? I've got this grounding sheet and I'm sleeping so much better. I went, me too. So you're right. That made a big difference to me during, you know, the first lockdown and when I was feeling bad. So did homeopathy, which I hadn't actually visited for quite some time. You know, I'd done homeopathy in the past, but you know, I hadn't been using homeopathy, and then I was recommended somebody very good. And I think, you know, of course, and vitamins, I was taking you know, zinc, vitamin C, magnesium, MSM, getting enough sleep, all the rest of it, being out in nature. But I actually think for me, the turning point from being really so fatigued that it felt like ME almost, to feeling really pretty good again, was the grounding sheet and the homeopathy. So you're right, you never quite know which is going to be the screw that you need to turn, do you?
That's it. And that's why some people will say, oh, well, I tried so and so and that didn't work, or I tried this thing and that didn't work. Well, there's loads more out. Just keep going and, you know, put them all together, and then they go, well, how do I know which one works? Who cares? Just do it, you know. Do it.
I'm 100% with you, because my journey, particularly through the 80s and then the 90s, because I did the PR for Tony Robbins and I was around lots of gurus. I mean, I think going in a wigwam up a mountain, going through a birthing ceremony, there was probably nothing I genuinely didn't try. You know, flotation tanks, I tried it. And it was all in the days when I'd go home to my parents in Nottingham and I'd tell my mum and she'd be like, oh, very nice, dear. Have you thought about seeing the doctor? I'd be like, no, that's the whole point. I don't want to see. I'm embracing this, you know. I sat in a henge with Jack Temple, who was famous. You know, he was a healer and a homeopath, and he would make you go and sit in his garden henge. And there were times you'd think, I don't know. But at the end of the day, the litmus paper is if you feel better. And it's the same with what I do. Transformational therapy, particularly the therapy. People have to nail their color to that mask. You know, the deciding factor is not, oh, can I go into trance really deeply and all of that. I've got so many tools in my toolkit, doesn't really matter. It's really, how committed are you to that change? How committed are you to this investment? That investment not only in your money, but also your time and the therapist. It's a partnership. And so for me, it's a two-way traffic. You know, I will speak to people, they can have a free 20-minute call with me, but actually it's a two-way street on that call, because if I just think they want a sticking plaster and they want somebody to fix them, then, you know, hypnotherapy, rapid transformational therapy isn't, you know, will probably wash over you, a bit like pouring water into a glass and you've put cling film on the top. If you're not going to let it in and be open to it. So you're right. You know, not only is it try it and see, you'll know the difference, you'll know the benefit, but also believe in it and go with it and try it and trust in it, because, you know, it's so important.
When it reminds me,
sorry, I lost you.
Yeah, I lost you a moment. I think we're back now. That reminds me about when I was on the cancer helpline for a charity, and I was taking calls from people who were newly diagnosed with cancer and, you know, various different forms. And with all the work I've done over the years with behavioural profiling and the psychology of behaviour, etc., the thing that comes through loud and clear, and the patterns of whether somebody is likely to recover from whatever it is they've got, whether it's cancer or anything else. If they have not made the decision to recover, they're not going to recover. If they're not resilient enough, if their behavioural profile is very gentle style, and they've had a history of anxiety and all sorts of stuff has happened to them, and they're kind of quite a delicate little flower, they're going to need more help and support to recover than people like us that are tough old boots, been around the block so many times we got dizzy. And there's a stark difference, and I was seeing this pattern, you know, time and time again. So what I've done now in my online business, I'm actually about to rebrand as DISC Plus, because the DISC behavioural profiling and the health, I've struggled for years trying to explain to people what it is that I'm trying to do with the urging of the health and the DISC, and our behaviour is so important and underlies what happens in our personal life, our career, our health, etc. And with the last 11, well, actually not 11, my whole life, because you mentioned you were on antibiotics from the age of 1.5 to 9. I was on antibiotics from the age of about 21 to 44 for a kidney disease I was born with. And back in those days, it took them till I was early 20s to be diagnosed, because I was a swimmer, I was a competitive swimmer competing at national level, and I was training twice a day. So the heavy chlorinated pool was the reason that was put down for my projectile vomiting or my waterwork infections and so on. So, you know, the antibiotics kept me going. But then when I was about 44, I discovered chiropractic, natural therapies, diet, lifestyle, shiatsu at the time, and so on and so forth. So it's our whole life's journey that kind of bring us to where we are now. And having interviewed you before, your life's journey has been absolutely fascinating.
Yes. So, I'm doing little dips into it because as I'm packing at the moment, I keep finding old photos. Of course, most of my truly Insta-worthy life took place before Instagram and everything had been invented. And I don't have any photos, you know. So I worked with celebs, I worked with royalty, I was in ab-fab world in PR in London, I worked for Tony Robbins and went all over the world. I have got stuff from the international charity, but I don't really have much from when I lived in the Bahamas for 5 years, and that was fascinating. Although I am writing a novel next year.
Are you?
Yeah, I kept diaries for 5 years.
Oh, so. Wow. I remember that's the key thing I remember from the radio interview we did. So for the benefit of the listeners, we've alluded to it a couple of times now. So spill the beans a little bit on your Bahamas adventure.
I will, but can I just address two points you made in that, what you were saying, because it was so fascinating. So one is about, you said we've been, you know, around the block a few times, and we're kind of tough old boots. On the resilience, because I've been really studying that, there's a set point for resilience, and some people genuinely are born with a slightly higher set point, but it's a really small percentage of the population. I don't know what the percentage is, but let's say 5%. It's a very, very small percent of people who just naturally seem to have a higher resilience set point. Most everybody else learns through, you know, their upbringing, their environment, and coping. And actually what a lot of studies have found is that people who actually everything is really nice, you know, a bit like you were saying, the delicate flowers. You know, I've had a lovely childhood. It was all lovely. Mummy burnt the toast once, but apart from that, it's been really lovely. But when they go to university and things, and suddenly things all go wrong, and they're not the top of the class, or their girlfriend dumps them, they deal with it really badly because they don't have that, you know, that muscle, that resilience muscle that actually those of us who've come through more adversity, you know, develop. So, you know, I wanted to just say that. And interestingly, when I had the cancer, and no, I always call it the cancer, not my cancer, I was just really angry with it. And I didn't really get a lot of great psychological advice at the time because it was 16 years ago and I was living in the Bahamas, which I'm coming to. But I called it Jeremy because the person I didn't like at school was Jeremy. And I'd look at it, my breast, and I'd go, right, Jeremy, you can just off. You know, you are not going to be part of me. We're going to cut you out. You're going to go away and you're never coming back. And I had this real, you know, blighty fighting spirit, which was, and luckily because I'd come through the 80s and the 90s with having to learn about all fantastic forms of complementary medicine, I had that toolkit, if you like, my Ayurvedic doctor in particular. And so really without having a blueprint for it, I did tread a really good path. So yeah, the Bahamas. So I ran a really successful PR company in London, Started it with a 5,000 redundancy payment in my spare bedroom in 1991 and sold it in 2000 when it had a 1.3 million pound turnover. Super success story, big house, all the rest of it. Absolutely exhausted, broken, kind of physically broken, mentally broken. Just got out, thought I'd dodged a bullet. I thought I'd got out alive. And my ex-husband was from the Bahamas, and his father had a big company there. And just as we sold our PR business, he died. And so my husband went to caretake the company because it had 130 staff. It was a big company. That caretaking, I'm going for a couple of weeks, turned into about a year. And we decided that we'd move there to just see that through. And what was a allegedly temporary move turned into nearly 5 years. So it was a very interesting experience. I lived in Nassau for the first couple of years, which is the capital. And I was familiar with it because I'd been visiting it for years. And it's a strange place, I think it's safe to say. So you've got gated communities. So like I did meet Sean Connery, who just recently died, because as you know, he lived in the Bahamas. So he lived in a place called Lyford Key, which we nicknamed Lifeless Key. And then the other really big gated community is Old Fort Bay, which we all called Old Fort Bay. So you get these like weird enclaves of people who are like billionaires and millionaires and celebs, and a lot of expats who are maybe on short banking contracts. And they live in these strange gated communities. And then you have everybody else. And the Bahamians had an emerging middle class at the time, which was great. And I've got so many friends from that class. But obviously there was a lot of poverty. And I've got a charity background, but probably I'm going to do a fundraiser for the Bahamas probably wouldn't go down so well. But literally, I moved to an out island and 90% of people live below the poverty line. Because basically, if you can't work in banking or the hotel and hospitality industry, and there's very little industry there. So it's a very strange community of haves and have-nots. It reminded me of The Great Gatsby, you know, which is my favorite novel, that like you've got the East Egg and West Egg, and in between it you've got the Valley of Ashes. So you've got the very poor people living, literally when I lived there, people were living in shacks with standpipes. But of course the tourists didn't see that because they were all in the big lovely resorts and they don't go very far. So it was La La Land. It was La La Land. And I did find it very strange, me being a very, you know, a grocer's daughter. And also I'd come from this really high profile career where I was on the front cover of like marketing magazines because I was so successful and my company won the PR Week award. And I'd go to dinner parties and people would turn to me and say things like, "So what's your favorite cupcake recipe?" And I'd go, "I used to be in business. I ran a PR company." You know, it was like that. You know, I used to be a contender. So I went through a lot of ego problems there. You know, I had a big loss of identity. I'd gone from this businesswoman in London and everything I knew to basically being a mum in a strange place. So I must say, I didn't really love it for quite some time. I found it very hard. And I think it took a very big emotional toll on me. And what I did was I channeled all my energy into being super fit. So I thought that was my, you know, counterbalance. So I would run 5 miles every day, go to the gym for 3 hours. I weighed 7 stone. Of course, being bulimic helped, you know, that really helped keep the weight off. I was vegetarian. So I had this idea that I was really healthy, really fit. So when I got the cancer diagnosis, I was a little bit surprised. But then I obviously had to come to terms with that and think, what was it that's arrived at this point? And that's when we moved to an out island. So we moved to Eleuthera, which means freedom in Greek. And that's where Lenny Kravitz is from. There's even a song called Eleuthera, if you see it. And that really was weird because it's a massive island, 110 miles long by a mile wide. The Bahamians who can work go to Nassau to work. It's like going to London. And then if you imagine, I went to the Outer Hebrides. And so you get the poor, the ill, the disaffected, the old, you know, the people who couldn't work. Plus, for good measure, all the drug dealers in the whole Bahamas and most of the Caribbean, and lots of billionaires. So this is why my book's going to be really fascinating, because you know, for a start, I get there and like the house, which was a farm, very, 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 very simple, a wooden building with bare floors, because it was a 10-acre organic farm. So we literally lived on the land and the sea. Didn't have any locks. And Nassau, we had razor wire and dogs, you know, because it's quite an unsafe environment. And I refused to live in one of the gated communities because I wanted to live in the community. But then I found out it was quite unsafe a lot of the time. I'm like, where are the locks? And my cleaner, who was a part-time policewoman, goes, oh, there's no crime here. I'm like, how can there be no crime? Well, it was a bit like the East End under the craze. Seriously, once I worked it out, because my kids went to this school that had been newly built, had a woman who'd been headmistress of the year, had brand new computers. It was like, oh my God, I never thought I'd find this in this remote island. What's going on? And there were 24 kids in the school because it was an all-age school. So they all went. And my cleaner said to me, Mrs. Palmer, you know that 18 of the kids are from the top drug dealing families in the Bahamas. It was like the craze. And I was like, no, I didn't know that. So we became friends. I still get Christmas cards from some of them. They do a lot for the community, but everybody turns a blind eye to the cigar boats coming and going in the night, including the government, to be honest, because, you know, there's a lot of money in drugs. So I'm going to have to be careful how I tread with some of that. But yeah, that was really fascinating. And then they were like crazy billionaires. Like I did a launch at the library because I wrote a booklet because they found out I'd had a PR background. And I started to paint. When I was in the cancer hospital, I took a painting course and discovered I could paint. So I'm talking to this guy and he goes, oh, I've just bought a painting for my house in America. And I go, hey, I've got some paintings. Look, they're $250. Turned out it was a Picasso. Because he named it. He said, oh, it's the, and I was like, oh, it's got him. I must Google it. You know, he just bought a Picasso. So it was a very, 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 very strange place, but an experience. You know, that's the thing about adversity and life and taking a chance and doing what you've done and moving country. And sometimes it's not quite the postcard version it looks, but I wouldn't swap any of it. I really wouldn't.
Our experiences make us who we are today, don't they, and shape us.
Yeah.
So interesting, you said about, you mentioned earlier on about, you never said my cancer, you said, what was it you said? The cancer. I say, I don't even say the or and I just say, I've had 4 cancers. So, and I've never realised that that's what I do, but that's what I say, and it's only you pointing it out. I've never owned it. It's not mine. You know, you can.
You're not one, you know. Of it, yeah, exactly. I get clients who come to me all the time, and you know, back to the intake form we were talking about earlier, and it will be my depression first turned up, my whatever, my this, my that, and the first time I meet them, I'm like, right, here's something really important. You need to stop taking ownership of that. You need to stop being determined by that. I'm not arguing that you have depressive tendencies or elements of depression, or even that some well-meaning doctor has given you a label. But we can give you a new label and you can choose a better label, and you don't have to identify with that label. So it's no longer my, and it takes quite a while to get out of that mindset of owning it, because when you own it, you give it power.
Exactly. The number of times I would have to help scrape people off the ceiling because they've been told something that's made them really angry by a medic, or I've had to help pick them up off the floor because the language that's been used has been so debilitating for them that they've just not been able to take anything in. And the language that other people use is, apart from ourselves, it's other people's language, isn't it? And we're constantly hearing, like the media, and you know full well with your PR background, that if you tell people something often enough, they'll believe it. And you know, that's kind of what's happening at the moment, but we're not going to go there because I'm very cross about what's going on at the moment.
Because that would be an entirely different conversation.
It would. So
that one, I was interviewed when I first came back to live in Nottingham because I launched the Race for Life, because somehow or other they got me on their radar and they were like, oh, you know, you've had cancer, please come and launch it. So I was like, yeah, you know, and I went and got on stage and kind of told my story and cut the ribbon, and off everybody went. And I did an interview with it was a Nottingham Evening Post at the time. And I know I chose my language so carefully. And I said to the guy, look, it's really important. Do you know what the headline was? Plucky single mum battles cancer and survives. You know, I was so annoyed when I saw, I was like, really?
Yeah.
I rang them up because obviously I've got PR background. I'm not afraid of ringing a journalist up. And I went, I never used any of those words, maybe single mum because I was.
Yeah.
And, oh, well, it made a better headline. I was like,
and that's the thing, people, headlines sell newspapers, you know, online media and whatnot, and people get sucked in by it and people believe it. I have in the past as well, but I now know you go below the headline, you do your own research, and then you come up and you realise the spin that somebody's put on the story was nothing like what you said, you know. Anyway.
It's the same for everything. It's the same for your health in particular. And I know you and I are absolutely on the same page on this one. Again, when I had the cancer all those years ago, and it was really back in the early days of the internet, and there wasn't so much information available. Also, I'm in the Bahamas and I had my treatment in America. So if you imagine, it would be like living in England and having your treatment in Russia. And because obviously they didn't have good enough facilities really back in the Bahamas. So I luckily had good private medical insurance. And I went to a brilliant hospital, and I chose that hospital, which is the Moffitt Cancer Clinic in Tampa, because I could have gone to the Sloan Kettering in New York. And I had a look at all the board of directors at the Sloan Kettering. I actually did some research and found that quite a lot of them had places, memberships, board director positions, or were keynote speakers for the big drug companies. So I knew that they were going to have a really oncology-based, drug-based philosophy, whereas the Moffitt is an independent cancer clinic. And I thought, well, at least I'm going to get a more independent. But even then, the oncologist, and look, I'm not criticizing, you know, there's a saying, isn't there? If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You know, so the oncologist was a hammer. My cancer looked like a nail to her. So, you know, for her, it's like, yeah, we're going to throw all this at it. We're going to do all this. I'm like, no, that doesn't feel right. I feel like I'm being steamrolled. I don't like the idea of it. Oh, but you know, all this. And I did have a particularly fast growing, not great form of cancer, you know. So when you're listening to them and they start bringing lovely little graphs out and everything and telling you about all your survival, it's very easy to get bulldozed and or just to negate your personal responsibility and go, oh, I give you my power, please guide me through this horrible time. No, not me. I'm not made of that stuff. I'm like, no, I'm going to, for everything you do, I'm going to go do my own research. Luckily, my niece at the time was doing a PhD in Washington and in pharmacology. And so she had access to a lot of sites that maybe the layman back in the day didn't get. So I literally came into the room with a manila file like this big. And so for everything she was saying, I was going, oh, yeah, but I think, to the point where after about an hour, she just went, I think we're done here. Just walked out the room and left me. And I was like, okay, well, I think so. And look, I don't say this because I'm proud I upset her. 100%, that is a genuine person who genuinely has trained and Socratically really believes that, you know, she's doing good work. But as I say, hammer and nail, hammer and nail, hammer and nail. And we're not all nails and we don't all need the same hammer.
I think you and I would be described as patients from hell, wouldn't we? We go in there we're telling them what's going to happen.
Well, I think I can share this bit because I don't think he's around anymore, but the surgeon, who was absolutely adorable, and he was like Father Christmas. He was like, you know, just this lovely, 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 lovely man. He came to do a procedure and he was laughing. He told me that she'd gone into the staff room saying I was the patient from hell and that never had she been so insulted and all the rest of it. And he said, well done. And he just said, you're plucky, aren't you, you Brits? You know, so he actually, you know, and he said, look, I couldn't give you advice to the contrary because we all respect each other in the different departments. But let's put it this way, you've made the sort of informed decision I probably would have made for myself. So I think I'm slightly legendary there, but for good and bad reasons. But yeah, you're right. I think you and I would not be seen as patient easy.
No, no. Anyway, there we go. So we've been there, done that, and we've written books and done all sorts of wonderful speaking engagements and goodness knows what. And I think we have. I don't know about you, but I feel I have a duty to share what I know, what I've learned and experienced to other people, so that they don't go through, they don't make the same mistakes. But as you rightly say, people need to do their own research. Although we can share all that, and as I say, I feel I have a duty to do so, but even then, as you said before, some people will kind of outsource their healthcare to somebody else. Well, that doesn't work. You have to make the decision yourself. And I've over the years now, I've got to really hone in quite quickly on those who are going to help themselves and those who are not. And anybody who's not going to help themselves now, I'm sorry. I'll give you the information. You do what you like with it, and that's it.
Same. And Elaine, again, I think that was why in your lovely little garden office, we were like, oh, there was so much resonating. Without sounding grandiose, and you see everything I post, I'm all over the place. I really don't believe I come across as grandiose, because it's not what I am. But I do think this is all being for a reason. I think it's my mission. Yeah. And I like to call it heading people off at the pass.
Yeah.
I know what it feels like when you go over the precipice and you go over the pass, and it isn't not much fun. I've had depression, I've had 2 divorces, I've had the cancer, I've had other things. These are not fun experiences. Okay, we're being resilient about them, but if I could head somebody off at the pass, that's my life's work. But they've got to want to also put the brakes on, and they've got to also want to go, and the other direction, we're going to do this. So I'm with you 100%. But I do think that everything has led to where I am now, and clearly I'm highly trained. But I think my life experience and the empathy and the compassion I bring, and because it's also been a health journey of mine for 30 years, really make me a kind of a very instinctual and empathetic coach and therapist at a level that I think you possibly couldn't train in. And also my communication background means that I can communicate it, and I feel I have a duty to. So I write for a lot of publications, and I write books, like you say, and do things like this, because I think being able to articulate it so that people understand. When I did my book, I didn't want to do it. I felt so exposed, and I was crying the whole weekend before it was published, going, no, I feel so exposed. Because in PR, basically, you're the person like the Wizard of Oz. You're behind the curtain, cranking the wheel. They're out there on stage. Suddenly I'm out there on stage, and it didn't feel very comfortable. And I really smiled and did the whole thing, but I didn't like it. And then I got a Twitter direct message from somebody quite high profile, actually, who connected on Twitter. I'd never spoken to in my life. And she said, I got your book, I read it. I've been bulimic for 15 years, and I've just admitted it to my husband, and I'm seeking help. And I thought, you know what? If that's all my book does, it's been worth it.
Absolutely. You just never know who you're going to affect. I get messages all the time from people all over the world, and it's really quite humbling, isn't it, when you know that you've affected, in a positive way, somebody who you don't even know that's across the other side of the world, and you think, yeah, you're not a bad old stick. So even though some things are a bit rocky here and there, overall, we know we're doing the best we can, and that's all anybody can do, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So, Rosalyn Palmer, thank you very much for your time today. Been an absolute pleasure as always. And let's remind listeners to your website and your upcoming programme.
So my website is www.rosalynpalmer.com, and everything I have, all resources, etc., is there. I'm very easy to find all over social media, Rosalyn Palmer. And the upcoming course, which I think will probably be on a platform like Udemy, we're just determining that now, but we'll let you know, will be 60+ ways to enhance and boost your energy and focus. We've also got a great course with the same co-provider, Stuart, which is goal setting. And seeing as everybody's plans were out the window, now's a brilliant time to do that. And that's on, I think it's called Skills Success, but I can give Elaine the link for that. And that combines my rapid transformational therapy and coaching and Stuart's coaching. I've also got another course coming out, which is actually about finding your voice to help people become published authors.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Soon, maybe you'll have to have me back.
I think so. I think so. We're only just starting. We're in the middle part of our lives, I would say, here on this earth. So I think we've got plenty more mischief to get up to before we croak.
Yeah, well, wish me luck. As you can see behind me, packing cases. So I'm moving on Monday. So that's, look, I tell people about intimacy, into me, see, work on yourself. I was a 2-time divorced woman in her mid-50s. I retrained for my new career and I did a lot of work on myself. And now I've found the love of my life and I'm moving in with him on Monday. We went into lockdown together and it worked brilliantly. He bought me 6 sheep for my birthday. We've got 3 acres. Another new chapter in my very interesting life, Elaine.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Ros.
You're welcome.